Hey Bryan,
What's going on, Karim? How's it going, man?
it's going. It's been a week, and what day is it? Wednesday?
Yeah, yeah. It's 3 weeks in, and it's been kind of crazy this year. So,
Yeah. Well, for folks who are tuning into this, you may not have seen us do something like this before, so I just want to set the table a little bit and say um, we have a lot of conversations as a team at Colloqate, processing uh, state of the world, the political and social climate that we live in and operate in as it pertains to our mission, um, and as it pertains to our lives as people, as individuals. And we wanted to try to break out of just our internal conversations and start sharing some of our processing and reflections with folks who follow along with us and who are also committed to this movement for design justice. So this is a fairly unstructured conversation. You and I are just going to chat, but we'll be doing more, and I hope we'll be able to get more of the voices of our teammates into these conversations so that folks can hear from the breadth of our team how we navigate our work. But first and foremost, on my mind and in conversations that we've been having recently, um, we are an abolitionist organization. Like, we
mhm.
carry that proudly, and we don't shy away from talking about that we don't believe that the carceral system is the system that brings justice to our people, to folks who are harmed by the built environment, but also the political and social structures that are reflected in that environment. And yesterday and Monday, we saw just this um, fire hose of executive orders coming out, a lot of them focused on really policing the boundaries of who belongs in America, right?
Yeah,
And policing those boundaries explicitly through expanding the carceral state, targeting immigrants and refugees, folks who are seeking asylum, and anyone who would give those folks safe harbor. Um, so I wanted to have this chat with you
hmm
and just, for one, hear you speak a little bit on what you see as the core of those issues as they pertain to our industry. Um, I know there's things happening in Louisiana specifically around this issue, and yeah, I'll just start there.
yeah. I mean, I think there's something interesting that happens when um, folks expand the kind of definition of criminality and um, start to apply that to the outcomes of the harms they've already placed in the world themselves, right? So when we talk about Louisiana, for instance, when we talk about the kind of homeless folks or houseless folks who are underneath our highways here in New Orleans, being scooped up and moved to warehouses miles away, and or put on buses similar to the way that Texas did a few years back. It is obviously dehumanizing, obviously disparaging in so many different ways, but ultimately the only reason that we allow that to happen is because we've set the bar for what criminality is at a point that encompasses most of the population in some form or another all the time, right? So if everyone exists within a constant state of criminality, except for those who are able to maintain the privileged systems that define what criminality is, then we're all at risk all the time. And so there's a necessary intersectionality that requires us to kind of consider not just our own safety and security, but those who are disinherited from systems as well. And whether that be from a poverty standpoint or a racial or a cultural or a gender standpoint, it is evident that the systems that we are bound to necessarily consider as many people as possible to fit within the pot of criminality. And so that's, I think, a big part of our job as a practice, is to kind of define how the spaces and places that folks have created in the past contribute to the frameworks that allow for that to be sustained, right? When we talk about abolishing carceral spaces, that doesn't just mean jails. It means every form of space that sits on the ladder to jail and beyond, right? Like it is necessarily every step in between. I would start there with that conversation, because I think it oftentimes we talk about abolition from the perspective of the most harmful condition. And yes, we do need to pinpoint that moment, but nearly every step before it has a political and a spatial condition that has to be addressed, because it snowballs. It snowballs to get someone to a prison, right? That's not the first step, right? So anyway, that's what's on my mind as it relates to this.
Yeah, it is important and interesting the way that you're framing that. Important to think about all of those upstream steps that result in those downstream spatial outcomes that are the reinforcing mechanism for this like system of carcerality. I was reading an article yesterday talking about how Louisiana has become like a major hub as a state for immigrant detention. And like within that article, it was referencing like all of these old decommissioned jails and prisons in the state that, you know, the populations that were formerly incarcerated in those spaces have been moved elsewhere. But then here's this profitable opportunity where you have this new administration coming in and saying, we are going to deport 11 million people. We need a place to store 11 million people. And the marketing push that comes from that of like, hey, are you a small town whose economy is struggling? Do you have a space that we can use to forcibly detain people? Like, this is going to create jobs. And then, of course, like being in the architecture industry, we're always looking at like, what is the role that our industry plays in being complicit or resistant or visioning an alternative. Like there are firms that design prisons. There are firms that do the renovation, like documentation to convert. I was reading another article talking about how in Texas, in Brownsville, there was like a 200,000 square foot Walmart that got converted into the largest detention center for migrant and refugee children specifically, you know? So like what—
This is a few years back, right? I remember this.
Yeah, that was in Trump 1.0. Yeah. What's your, as a spokesperson, not the only, but a spokesperson for Colloqate and for this movement, like what's your challenge to the profession here?
I mean, ultimately, I don't think the profession is going to do what's right in this force. So that's not, while I would challenge the profession, my instinct would actually be to organize outside of and which is what we've been doing, right? Organize outside of the profession to put pressure on the profession. Frankly, our industry is not that strong when it comes to having like a will to fight outside challenge. So with enough pressure, we'll buckle pretty quickly as an institution. And so I think a lot about giving and sharing the tools with other organizers who are dealing with abolitionist considerations, and giving the tools. I think a lot about sharing the tools from a spatial abolitionist perspective to those who are dealing with it from a political or a social consideration, and trying to bind those movements together or bind those tactics together in order to demonstrate both an outcome and to give people the strategies that allow them to you know to prevent or slow the roll of the progress of new institutions being built. And I think that really just looks like, where are the ethics complaints that can be filed against most of the firms that are producing these spaces. And a lot of those firms, again, we know they hide a lot of the prison work that they do, or the kind of the prison work that they do on their website, so they don't demonstrate that. That's not like a core value. And if it's not good enough for them to put out into the world, then unclear why they would think it would be good enough for them to do to other people, or harm other people in that way. So that's what I would say. My suggestion would be less for firms who are not going to listen to us, and more for both the firms and the community organizations that are doing this work, to be more broad about the tactics and tools that can be used in this fight. I'd also say the biggest thing, so in working with a lot of other different organizations who are doing this across the country at a very high level, the biggest thing that we often talk about is the lack of a vision for what's on the other side of abolition. And that challenge is to the profession, right? We actually can, there's nothing saying that we have to stay within a typology. Like, the typology has been given to us. We don't have to own that typology. We can actually shift that typology. We can make it something that is useful, not prisons at all, but what are the things, again, upstream or otherwise, that need to be put in place as a typology of architecture or spatial design that actually allows for communities to preempt the need for that. And, potentially schools were supposed to be that, and maybe they were in the past, but that from the 70s on, that's not, that was kind of a non-starter, right? That's how it, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, schools schools can be a whole other conversation that we jump into, like, related to this, but a couple of things that are coming up for me and what you were just saying, like grounding in the organizing within community, not like relying on a professionalized industry to have the political will. I think what I've seen in the work that we do together, is folks within this industry, many folks that we've interacted with, are like hungry for a political analysis that they can like leverage to make meaning of their work, and do it in a way that is progressive and just and radical, getting to the root, right, of the injustices. And we had that gathering here in Portland a little while ago, where we just like had a little meeting, salon style, inviting folks who are in the architecture field to talk about our power as people, as agents of these systems. And it was like inspiring and heartening and moving to see how many folks showed up, not looking for direction necessarily, but like just wanting to feel like they were connected to other people who shared those values and who did want to do something. And for me, I think the big opportunity here, important opportunity, is twofold. One, get out of our offices and stop relying on our professional spaces to be the places where we're building political power. Like, we can use those spaces, but they're not the solution. Like you said, it's find the community organizations and get involved in those organizations with our skills and resources. But two, like the political education process within the industry, where we are actually creating a network of more radical thinkers, which the Design as Protest collective has been like instrumental for me in, you know, coming into that sense of agency and seeing how it's possible to work with people across the continent. I I think about both of those things as like really critical to our work as an organization, but also like you don't have to be a nonprofit design justice practice like in
Mm-hmm.
order to be an agent of that work, right?
Correct. Yep.
So I'd make a call to our friends in the industry, get out of your offices and find the organizations that are doing abolitionist work and figure out ways to support that work, which like the simplest and easiest way to do that, one of the things that, you know, so our coworker Sophia um, and Catherine and a few other folks worked on was like, there was that prison expansion project in Sacramento. We connected with Decarcerate Sacramento, a group of organizers who were fighting the expansion and like $1 billion bond that was going to fund this unnecessary jail expansion.
Yeah.
And what did we do? Like, as architects, we studied the plans that were being developed and we presented a counter proposal saying, here's how you comply with this consent decree that had been established by you know, the legal, like through the legal process and appeals process there, so that you don't need to build more prison space in order to like protect people's constitutional rights that are being violated in the existing prison system. And any architect could, of their own volition, step into that kind of role and provide that kind of service. I want to ask before, because I want to make a connection here to like climate catastrophe. But before I do that, I want to ask you to share a little bit about a project that the team is working on in New Orleans, the Abolitionist Spaces project, just
Yeah.
like what that is. Yeah,
Yeah.
and what we're trying to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of the Abolitionist Spaces project is really defined by that proposition I just mentioned a little earlier, which is we struggle to see what's on the other side of winning this battle around abolition. And I think abolition isn't new, right? Like it's not as though we haven't had other forms necessary for abolition, whether that was the abolition of slavery or the like. We have always had to envision what was on the other side of that, and what was on the other side of it was always something different than we materially expected, right? Like we had to actually readjust our thoughts once we got past what we thought was an end, right? And so even if we are to win this battle tomorrow everyone says, you're right, no prisons, we would have nothing to do because we have very little distinction of what it actually means to not have prisons in our world. And that's hard because that's the world that we've lived in for its entirety. And so for our lifetime. So I think the Abolitionist Spaces project is a way to define new typologies of space that effectively handle or effectively impact the issues at the ground level, at the root level, at the root cause, and try to create spaces that will affirmatively influence the outcomes there, as opposed to attempting to resolve things by decentralizing or pulling people out of population, right? What happens when we use that amount of money? I mean, we know that the cost to house prisoners is essentially equal to them going to a year of school at Harvard, right? Like it is expensive to do. And so we are wasting money out of spite and out of harm rather than putting money into human beings that can be valuable members of our broader community. And so the intention is to not just talk about and write about what a future beyond looks like. It is to visualize and to demonstrate cinematically what do those spaces and moments look like. And make renderings and architecture that actually demonstrates, hey, this is what can happen when we actually do right. And we have, partners in the industry and friends in the industry, whether that's Dean and Van Buren with Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, that have been doing this for years and years and years, and have been a tremendous influence in this work. We, have worked locally with the John Thompson Center and Jackie Summel and Freedom to Grow, the kind of Solitary Gardens community here, and all of these folks have been inspirations to us because they've all moved to the side of demonstrating what an outcome can be. It doesn't mean it's the only outcome. It doesn't mean that it's the actual solution. It means that until we start to define and design what the other side of that world looks like, or the other side of that rainbow looks like, we're going to end up right back in the same space, because power abhors a vacuum, and it will consume itself and put us right back in the same position as we see happening in DC.
Yeah. I mean, just the what is it, Project 2025, the like blueprint that the Trump regime had ready to go. I mean, you could call that, I would maybe call that the inverse of what you're describing, like it is an imagination, like it is an imagined future, except it's investing in imagining like expansion of all the existing structures that are unjust. But it certainly presents it to, the audience that it's speaking to in a way that is like a positive vision, right? Like an aspirational positive vision. Yeah, so I think
because it also speaks to like the same result. Like they are saying the world will be better if these folks aren't doing the thing that they're doing, whatever that thing is, right? Or if they don't exist within the context of a society in a specific way. And we're not saying something different, and that's the problem, right? We're saying that if folks were able to exist in the context of our society in a different way, this is what our world can look like. The sentence is the same, but they are providing an end goal that's a vision that says, well, if you don't have a good way to do that, then we'll just put them somewhere else and forget about them and not try to. So I think that's the biggest thing we're going to face, is that, yeah, you're right. They are giving a solution that is the same output or outcome that we're all seeking, but they are doing it in such a violent, dehumanizing manner. Like we all want people to be better, and to or not to be better, to have the tools and resources to exist in a world that is constantly trying to pull us apart, right? So anyway, I'll stop rambling, but that's...
No, it's a good ramble. It's a good ramble. Yeah, it is saying, in order for you to thrive, rather than creating a intersectional solidarity like society, you need a fortress society, and we need to define very clearly who is not part of that. So that's the power of art and design, which this Abolitionist Spaces project as an art and design project is centered on. And I want to like remind or recall and inform folks who might be tuning into this that like immigrant and refugee youth are subject to the carceral system, right? Families getting pulled apart and kids getting thrown in detention centers. So some of the workshops that I know the team down there, like that Amina is going to be leading, are focusing on youth who are impacted by immigration, who are undocumented, whose existence is criminalized by nature of the, country of origin of their parents. So I want to tie that into climate catastrophe, like I mentioned a moment ago, because there's like a foot of snow on the ground in New Orleans today, which, although our teammates down there are frolicking and enjoying, the snow day kind of vibes. At the same time, there's been like, I was talking with Leland earlier, one of our coworkers, and he was like, yeah, it's fun. And like, this is the most snow that New Orleans has seen in a century.
Yeah.
This is the coldest day on record in New Orleans.
Hmm.
And like the climate dread, the like existential like fear or dread that comes from seeing the climate around you like do things that are so out of the ordinary, unexpected. Um, but like we're also watching and mourning the fires in LA.
Hmm.
I know folks who are impacted by that. I've got folks in my life who are safe, but also like just the toxic smoke alone
Hmm.
is traumatizing. We saw that in the fires up here in 2020 in Oregon.
Yeah.
Um, it, it is apocalyptic to look outside your window and see the sky orange with ash falling. And climate disaster is a contributing factor to refugee, emigration.
Hmm.
People are coming from all over the world trying to find safe harbor because this nation has created the conditions, contributed and fought against the prevention of climate catastrophe. And so we're seeing like international refugees, but also like
Yeah.
increasingly, right,
Yeah.
internally displaced people. Um, it's something that I think our industry talks about more fluently when we talk about like sustainability and like low carbon and all those things. But um, I also don't see us drawing the connections, or I guess I should say, I also don't see architects and designers drawing the connections between climate disaster and the carceral state. Um, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we don't like unpleasant conversations as a as a field. So,
I
um,
love this conversation. What are you talking about?
I mean, we do collectively in Colloqate, but I think in general, when we talk about like the profession, um, it's much harder for people to pull in humanity when they are yeah, when we spend so much time focused on how the buildings can, through various means, support people only through the kind of sustainability considerations, right? Like that is the primary function of a lot of the tools that we've been producing over the course of the year. It's not necessarily to make lives better. It is first and foremost to make the machine work better. And if the machine then works better to support the lives of the people, that's great. And I think there's a distinction that we don't often make because we don't want to get to the granular level of human beings. And I know we think we do, but I went through this thing when I left traditional practice from a firm I loved and started working at a more ground level. I realized how detached firms actually are from the humanity of the societies that they and the communities that they are a part of, and that struck me to the core. And I think it's a big part of why Colloqate exists is because of that realization. Um, and so I'm I don't have the right answer for that, but I do know that um, the connection between climate crisis, climate refugees, and the kind of conversations around sustainability and architecture have to boil down to a level of granularity that we just haven't put into our services yet. And until we do that, we'll continue to miss the point. It's how can I best say this? Um, oh, I don't know. Let me think about it so I can get the words right. But anyway, what's your thought here?
I agree with you that we don't get to the granular, to the root, to go back to that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I like the framing that you just made of it's how to make the machine work better. And like buildings are machines, right? I mean, mechanical systems, but like overall, it's a machine that's built to do a thing and you program it to do that thing. And like among the things that it does is serve a specific social function
Mhm.
for the people who are inhabiting it or interacting with it. But like, this is where I have felt frustrated with
Mhm.
architecture coming from a landscape architecture background back from when I was like in school of
Yeah.
like the work that we would do in our landscape studios was thinking about ecological systems, thinking about ecosystem time, you know, like landscape time. You plant a tree today, it's going to look the worst on opening day.
Yeah.
And you're like, you just have to know that in 50 years time, maybe 100 years time when I'm no longer here, that what we planted will come into its full fruition. And that's
Yeah.
like the inverse of how the architects around me were trained to think, right? It's like, think about what your building looks like from the street. That was about the amount of context that people were like encouraged to consider.
Yeah.
And like, it's going to look its best on opening day and you hope it lasts 50 years.
Yeah.
Um, so I often try to like push that of like, what does it mean for this building that we are working on or designing to um, play a like transformative social and cultural function,
Yeah.
or a like more than just energy sustainability function, but like a society sustaining function for generations. Um, and you know, we're all, I mean, just personally, but in our conversations together, like we're all grappling with what our future is going to look like under climate catastrophe. It's a paradigm shift that is unavoidable.
Yeah.
I have a, you know, I have a 14-month-old daughter, and even having the conversation about like wanting to have a kid, like that's a factor, right? I mean, that was a factor for us. Um, like, what's the world that we're bringing this person into?
Mhm.
Um, what's the world that I'll leave her to live in?
Yeah.
So it's heavy and it's hard. And the statistic that I found as I was like thinking through this conversation earlier is um, over 90% of counties in the US alone have experienced a federally declared climate disaster between 2011 and 2023.
You're kidding me.
No.
Jesus
Um,
Christ.
but like, what are we doing? What have we done in that time? Like, in
Pace
the
it up.
guise of,
Jesus.
yeah, we've been like energy independence, right?
Mhm.
It's a national security issue. If you have to frame it as anything, it's a national security issue.
The only way you win, yeah.
And what is national security? It's like global policing, right? Like, we need to get over there with our military and secure the fossil fuels before anyone else can get them, or so we can secure our prices. We need to open up fracking here. We need to open up oil exploration in Alaska, you know, like poison indigenous communities on their lands, like as though somehow having access to that energy will magically make this situation, which is just one decade, right? In
Yeah.
one decade, 90% of the counties in this country have experienced this. Um, so it's a lot. It is a lot to like process. And we're not coming here with answers. That's not the point of this conversation. It's mostly just like making public the processing.
Yeah.
Um, but I do want to. I'm like recalling one like simple action that I saw some firms in the industry take back in the first Trump administration when he pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords, um, which was make a pledge to commit to the goals of that,
Mhm.
global agreement and keep pushing on it, in spite of the fact that not only will it be disincentivized by the government, but it will be actively undermined and opposed by the government. And that's a place where, like, I do think our industry has the power and muscle and technical expertise to, like, push back. Again, it takes organizing. I'm not relying on any professional organization
Yeah.
alone, but, like, it's hard for me to imagine firms and practices that have developed really robust approaches to reducing the, like, climate impacts of the work that they do, just, like,
Mhm.
reverting to, all right, whatever, anything goes. Um, some will, but I think it's like worse design outcomes all around. And yeah, I would, like, make a call for folks to, like, put their money where their mouth is, including us, right? Like, to constantly learn and train ourselves on how to do design work towards climate justice and not just for the machine to function more efficiently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. We got a lot of work to do. And I think, we've been graced and lucky enough to work with some really amazing partners that have had similar considerations, whether that's, again, DJDS or Building Beyond Policing. I think uh, St. Louis, Close the Workhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the, honestly, Close the Workhouse is probably some of the best organizing around abolition I've ever been around.
Mm.
Um, so I think there's a lot for us all to learn. I think there's a lot of folks who are doing tremendous work in the world. So if there are designers and architects and folks who actively want to be engaged in this conversation, we can put some links and we can kind of share some resources for folks.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that it's obviously an uphill battle, but I don't think any of it is unwinnable. I do think we have to have a vision that people can see and that people can lean into with ease, right? People
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to, especially folks who are not on the ground on a consistent basis, they want to be able to lean into an easier life. And if we make things more difficult for those folks, just by the nature of our uh, the way that we move as organizers or activists, then no, we're never going to get folks to be on that side. So it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and it doesn't mean that all of it will always be easier for folks. But in the midst of trying to make the world better, we have to make the world softer and have more love and more care and more grace for folks who aren't going to be in the battle with us, aren't going to be on the ground with us on a consistent basis. So anyway, it's a lot, but we got a lot of folks with us doing it. So
We do. I think what I'm thinking about to kind of round that out is the work of the Designers Protest Collective. And we'll share info, I know, on, like, ways for folks to plug into that network in the coming weeks and months. But also, like, if folks watch this and they're on the ground in New Orleans or in Portland, where we have locations, like where we physically are in community, whether you're in an organization that's focused on abolition, climate justice, the intersections across, or you're in the architecture, design professions, industries, and, like, looking for community within this space, reach out, get in touch with us. We're trying to do more of these, like, just meeting with each other to build power together, within and without the industry. So that's my Yeah, that's my plug here.
Cool. Well, good first run at this. Let's see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
Bryan.
I appreciate you, man. Talk soon.
See you.
Bye.
See ya.